It's John the Half Hand. They're back. Two blasted wildlings.
You're not fighting them alone. Come on.
Three blasts.
Run!
Revenants have been a staple in any setting that has to do with the undead. Unholy abominations that walk, creep, float, or shuffle their way through the night. For what purpose? Perhaps to fill a deed or oath left undone. Haunt or terrify the living. Or maybe the taste of something a bit more warm. In this historical spotlight, I want to dive into one of my favorite risen corpses found roaming the villages of Scandinavia, the Draugr. Even if you haven't studied Norse mythology, you have probably heard this name before. Skyrim's Catacombs, God of War, White Walkers in Game of Thrones, or even the Barrow-wights from J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Draugrs have inspired many works throughout the centuries, and for good reason. Speaking of, did you know that a lot of creatures and elements found in fantasy have been inspired by or taken from world history? Hi everyone, my name is Brett, and welcome to the Fantasy Historian. On this channel, we talk about monsters. Monster spotlights from Dungeons and Dragons and the counterparts that inspired them, like this one, found in history, as well as any other interesting connections between history and fantasy we can find. If that sounds like your cup of tea, pull up a seat and toss a like and subscribe to The Storyteller if you're willing to do so. Thank you all, and now back to the Draugr. Each culture and time period has their own variations and beliefs, but among these, the Draugr stands above the rest as a unique example. Why? Well, unlike the slow, mindless, shambling revenants portrayed in movies, Draugr are intelligent and differ greatly. Apart from evildoers, they could be battle-hardened warriors, or renowned poets, and respected jarls. Because of this, they've had a very interesting role in the worlds of fantasy. Yes, they are most fitting in settings that feature the cold, mountainous landscapes of the north, but their influence can go beyond that. Ever want intelligent undead other than vampires? Though vampires are very cool. How about battle-hardened soldiers instead of the delicate and rattling skeletons that are just so easily defeated? What about benevolent undead? Ones that impart warning, wisdom, and prophecies. The Draugr doesn't fit the fantasy world. The lessons and attributes that not only make up the Draugr, but the culturally rich Norse and Viking Age history can inspire our own creations. For those who don't know, most of what we know of the Norse comes from the Codex Regius, a medieval compilation of Old Norse poems, the Poetic Edda that adds more poems, the sagas, and the Prose Edda. The Codex Regius and the Poetic Edda are a compilation of anonymous poems that are as close as we can get to the original poems told or sung of old regarding Norse mythology. The sagas were mostly written around the 13th and 14th centuries in Iceland and recount the lives of famous Icelanders, Scandinavian kings, and Germanic folk heroes. These are the more quote-unquote historical focused manuscripts. The Prose Edda, also known as just the Edda, was recorded by the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, who uses a lot of the material from the Poetic Edda and adds in his own account. It is incredibly useful for obtaining information on all things Norse, but much of the Nordic religious practices and beliefs had turned to Christianity around the time that the Prose Edda was recorded, making it harder to decipher which are old or newer beliefs. In Old Norse, there are 4 words that correspond to the undead, which kind of explains the versatile nature of the Draugr. Draugr, or Draugr for plural, is a revenant, undead man, or ghost. Astroganga, meaning again walker, Haubri, meaning barrow or mound dweller, Feverbither, meaning appearance or vision. These words are used interchangeably in some cases, especially in English translations. The time period in which literary works were written also plays a role. The Draugrs found in the Poetic Edda are different in appearance and behavior than those written in later sagas. Alright, that's enough clarifications. Let's take a look at some Draugr. There are two very popular Draugr found in the Grettis saga, also known as Grettir the Strong. In chapter 18, Grettir and his newly acquainted friend Audun rob the grave of Karr the Old, who is said to have been buried with his riches. Grettir decides to take a look around the tomb and leaves a very nervous Audun to guard the rope used to get into the barrow. Quoting from the saga, quote, "Then Grettir entered into the barrow, and right dark it was, and a smell there was therein none of the sweetest. Now he groped about to see how things were below. First he found horse bones. Then he stumbled against the arm of a high chair, and in that chair found a man sitting. Great treasures of gold and silver were heaped together there, and a small chest was set under the feet of him full of silver. All these riches Grettir carried together to the rope. But as he went out through the barrow, he was gripped at right strongly. Thereon he let go the treasure and rushed against the barrow dweller. And now they set on one another unsparingly enough." End quote. Karr and Grettir wrestle one another, each one trying to get the upper hand. When Grettir realizes that he can't win by strength alone, he flips Karr onto his back, grabs his sword, and cuts off his head. This is very interesting. Grettir then places the head at the eyes of old Karr, the believed way to truly kill a Draugr. Why this is so interesting is because it's a very common practice to stop any dead from rising again. Most notably, vampires. If you've ever seen vampire burials, you have the head down between the legs. Now, Karr the Old would be a Haubri, or a barrow dweller, as he doesn't leave his burial mound. And with this story, we learn of the incredible strength of the Draugr, as Grettir the Strong is on equal footing with Karr the Old. The next Draugr, however, doesn't like to wait around. In chapters 33 to 35 of the same saga, a strong man named Glam was hired at a certain man's farm to watch sheep. One day, Glam didn't return home and his body was found buried beneath the snow. Quote, "Now, they looked closely and saw where Glam lay a little way therefrom. He was dead, and as blue as hell, and as great as a neat." End quote. This is important because we get a description that will be repeated from time to time. Draugr can look just as they did when they were alive. They can look like their time of death, with all injuries included, or they can look a hell-colored blue, black, and or deathly pale, with bodies that seem to have grown in size as Glam did. And as I think across all different media, you have the blue eyes mainly that is shown in video games and movies, and not really always the blue hue of the body, of the skin. But there are some interpretations, especially like the one in the Game of Thrones, with the White Walkers, especially the general, is very ice-like. I digress. Things get more interesting here, as Glam was not a happy camper at all. Quoting from the saga, quote, "A little time after men were aware that Glam lay not quiet, folk got great hurt therefrom, so that many fell into swoons when they saw him, but others lost their wits thereby. But just after Yule, men thought they saw him home at the farm. Folk became exceeding afeard thereat, and many fled there and then. Next, Glam took to riding the house roofs at night, so that he went nigh to breaking them in. Now he walked well nigh night and day. Hardly durst men fare up into the dale, though they had errands enough there. Glam would crush anything within reach, human, animal, and houses alike, forcing the locals to all leave their homes. Glam would also stomp around on rooftops, breaking beams and destroying houses. It wasn't until Grettir came to the village that he was sought out to kill the Draugr. And yet another wrestling match, Glam is beheaded with his head being laid between the legs, just like Karr the Old's. With his death, the huntings finally stopped. For good measure, the townsfolk burn the body and carry away his ashes. But before he died, Glam was able to place a curse on Grettir that ended up bringing about the death of Grettir. The strong Grettir ends up an outlaw that dies young and alone. There's also something else that is worthy of note: an aura of madness. Anything, including animals that came near to Glam, became mad. There's another story of a Draugr that was burned to ashes. A local young bull licked the stones where some of the ashes lay and became a cursed bull, growing in abnormal size and strength as it got older. But they called that was altogether otherworldly. Not every story involving the Draugr has them guarding its burial place or terrorizing the area. In the Laxdæla saga, on chapter 76, a man named Thorkel and his warrior crew drowned at sea. Later that same day, they were seen by a woman named Gudrun, quote, and when she came to the church, then she seemed to see that Thorkel and his folk were come home, and all stood out before the church, and she saw the sea ran off their raiment, end quote. There are a few accounts that I could find that were translated into English of what is referred to as sea Draugr, those that drowned at sea. This was a common belief, however, especially for a culture that is known for their seafaring. In this particular story, the Draugr all appeared together, but other than give a greeting to Gudrun, they just stood by silently. If whole crews could become Draugr, I thought that surely there would be legends of Draugr crews raiding villages or fighting battles like you see in all sorts of fantasy stories or books and movies. Perhaps the reason is that most warriors are taken away by Valkyries to the halls of Valhalla. In the Eyrbyggja saga, or saga of the Air Dwellers, there is an instance of a man who practiced a Norse tradition called Utiseta, or house sitting, in which a person tries to connect or draw inspiration from the inhabitant of the grave. In this case, a man who wished to be a skald sat on the grave of a renowned skald. The Draugr comes up from his grave, sits next to him, and imparts his knowledge to the man. This story shows the more respectful side of the dead. The Norse believed in the reincarnation of ancestors, naming their children after them. The burials of just jarls were placed on hilltops overlooking the village to protect and bless them. Amongst the tellings of undead warriors and mighty leaders, there are some stranger ones. Also found in the saga of Air Dwellers, one particular story tells of a woman by the name of Thorgunna, who falls ill from a rain not of water, but of blood. Before she dies, she tells those closest to her to bring her bones and belongings to a church in another village. As the coffin bearers carried her corpse to the designated village, they sought a place to stay and rest. The goodman of the house allowed them to stay, but refused to prepare food and drink. During the night, Thorgunna rises from the coffin and cooks food, specifically mentioned in the nude. She berates the goodman of the house for not feeding her coffin bearers, and he, scared witless, apologized and relented to serve his guests along with the food Thorgunna made. Thorgunna then returns to her coffin, and the men bring her to her destination the following day. I hope everyone enjoyed that historical spotlight on the Draugr. Thank you all for listening. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.